All right, but you guys don't know the crazy history of the carnivore diet. It goes back many centuries even. There are crazy LSD drug people involved in this. You know, a lot of people know that I actually wrote the book, The Carnivore Diet. I popularized the term, but I certainly didn't create the diet itself. This has been around for, as I mentioned, hundreds and hundreds of years. I just, by going on Joe Rogan back in 2017, exposed a lot of people, and then I called it the carnivore diet because the current name was kind of, not doing the job, quite honestly. So some of the first literature references to a carnivore diet go back, at least in the medical context to the late 1700s, where Dr. James Rollo, who was a Scottish surgeon, was using carnivore diets to treat diabetics successfully. Using these all-meat diets were, something that they found to be very efficacious with diabetics, as we see them still today. Human physiology has not changed much over the centuries. To be honest, it predates even way before that. The ancient Greeks were talking about all-meat diets for their Olympic athletes during the ancient Olympics that were going on. So we know that, and quite honestly, probably some Australopithecus, pre-human, probably started eating meat in an all-meat diet long before anybody of us or even thought about. So, but as we go through time, we go from James Rollo, we go to Dr. Salisbury, who was a sort of famous physician in the period of the Civil War, and he's actually where the Salisbury steak came from. He had this sort of basically pounded hamburger steak that he used for treatment of all kinds of maladies, to include things like autoimmune disease and diabetes and mental health disorders. And so this was the treatment of the day, which was quite effective back then as it is today. If we fast forward to the early part of the 20th century, many people are familiar with an explorer by the name of Vilmar Stefansson. Now, Stefansson was a Canadian. He was of Icelandic descent, but he spent many years, in fact, as much as a decade, living in the polar regions. He was a naturist and, went all over the world, but he spent a lot of time interacting with the Native Americans in Alaska and North America and Canada, the Inuit particularly, and lived amongst them for many years. And he stated that there were periods of time when he lived on all-meat diets for long periods of time, for up to a year or more. And he said that was the best health he'd ever been in his life. All of his maladies had disappeared. Now, interestingly, when he returned from his adventures up in the Great White North, the modern doctors of the time did not believe him. They said there's no way you can live on just meat. And what he did was this famous experiment. Back in 1928, he and his partner, a guy named Karsten Anderson, who was a fellow explorer, volunteered to, for a year live on an all-meat diet. And initially they were locked in a metabolic ward, and then after that they had somebody follow them around everywhere for a year. And at the end of the year, it turned out they were fine. They had no issues. They were doing fine. They were in excellent health. And so, again, this is some of the early stuff. Now, this inspired some other people's. Now, there is a book called Strong Medicine, written by a fellow by the name of Blake Donaldson, who is a doctor, I believe, out of New York. Now, he, again, was using all-meat diets to treat a number of diseases and problems. He talked about how women who were hysterical would do better if they had all-meat diets. And the book is, by modern context, a fairly not politically correct book. I'll put it that way. But anyway, he, again, documents very plainly that all-meat diets work for a whole bunch of diseases. Now, interestingly, this is where it kind of gets a little weird. There's a guy, Owsley Stanley. Now, he was a sound guy, a sound engineer for the band The Grateful Dead. Additionally, he was a big LSD manufacturer. In fact, I think he went to prison for a while or something like that in the 1960s. But at that time, he was adopting an all-meat diet. And apparently, he did this for many years. And many of the old heads around the zero-carb community obviously know of his writings. He called himself the Bear for some reason. And he had some, interesting beliefs. He thought salt was a poison. And there are still some people today that sort of, still believe that. Whether it's true or not, it's hard to say definitively. But he had a pretty big impact on what I would call the modern carnivore movement, because he had access to the internet. This is just about the time when people were starting to share stories online. And now we live in this day and age of social media where, every crazy trend turns into a TikTok viral video, and then there's millions of people trying this out. But Owsley Stanley, this LSD guy, was a proponent of this, and he lived into his mid-70s. I think he died at age 77 of a car crash, but he was generally in good health. And then, we had books, I think it was called The Stone Age Diet, And the one line that's always kind of interesting, he said that, every human being that could not live on a diet of meat and fat was basically wiped out through natural selection. You had to be tough enough to survive, and that's how humans got through, the years and years and centuries of ice age, as many of us, our ancestors clearly had to live in, had to deal with. And so when I came to this, there were already a few thousand people doing this. They call themselves zero carb folks. There's a Facebook group called Zeroing in on Health. It was run by a guy named Charles Washington, who, it kind of keeps to himself these days. I mean, there was a couple called the Anderson couple. They were a couple that just only ate ribeye steaks, and supposedly they've been doing this for now 25 or so years. They initially came out, and a lot of people attacked them, around maybe their kids, because they may have been feeding their kids this way. They were kicked out of the low carb community because they were too radical. And then I ended up discovering them and thought it was quite interesting. And of course, I adopted this zero carb diet at the time. Went on Joe Rogan's podcast, was obviously put into the limelight just by chance. It's not I had any particular great skill or anything, but it's more providence than anything else. And so, a book company asked me to write a book about this, this all meat diet. And so I called it the Carnivore Diet. And that is why we today call it the Carnivore Diet. I'm not the first person to come up with the term carnivore. There are other people that have, referred to carnivore style diets, but, again, it just happened to be what it is. And so today we have all manner of people that are carnivore Carl and carnivore Jim and crazy carnivore and carnivore farmer and carnivore baker and carnivore teacher and butcher and all these things. And so the movement has expanded, it's continued to grow. It will continue to grow. There are people that are detractors, obviously, people that were former carnivores that are now detractors. That's going to happen with time. But I will say this, a carnivore diet is an incredibly powerful tool for healing. It can take people that are very sick, and it does, and I've seen it over and over again, very sick, and make them healthy. And that's great. And I think that's a wonderful, wonderful thing. And we should be very excited and happy that we discovered that. Or rediscover that, I should say, and we should utilize it. And if you want to do it for 6 months, a year, 10 years, 20 years, 50 years, it's up to you. Don't worry about what other people think. Don't worry about, who got what benefit or not benefit or any of those types of things. There's a lot of sort of obviously misinformation out there on both sides, pro and con, I have to say. Now, I will tell you, if you are interested in having someone help you that is a physician that has a lot of experience with this, can help you navigate some of the difficulties, the transitions, some of the medical decisions around nutrition, lifestyle, check out what we're doing at Rivero. We are changing lives on a daily basis. And I would love to be able to meet you and talk to you, because I've talked to all our Rivero patients, or at least I'm available to all of them to talk if they want to talk to me. So anyway, that's the crazy history of the carnivore diet. I didn't invent it. I kind of popularized it in many ways. It's fun thinking about how we've changed and where this is going, because it's not slowing down. It's continuing to be adopted by more and more people throughout the world. And it's really fun to be part of it.